So, Rob, it's time to talk about the third Doctor, Jon Pertwee.
Yes, and I'm very excited to be doing this, I've got to say, Dave.
Yeah, let me say right from the offset, although now as a cynical old adult, my favourite Doctor is William Hartnell, when I was a kid, right through to being a teenager, Jon Pertwee was my favourite Doctor, and I still have a huge fondness and a huge regard for him and his era. And a lot of that does stem from the fact that we, I think as Australians, particularly of our sort of vintage, just grew up on watching Jon Pertwee all the time. He was repeated regularly. Most years you get at least some run of Jon Pertwee stories, so we saw them all growing up. But they are also just such fun, diverse, interesting stories. And look, there's a lot I'm going to talk about in terms of the production, but yeah, I'm coming at this era from a place of real fondness.
Yeah, I'm a little bit different here, Dave. As delighted as I am to be doing this, let me explain that Pertwee is the Doctor I couldn't get into for the longest time. Longest time.
Okay.
Yeah. It's weird, though, because I've loved the demons since I was a kid. Day of the Daleks was one of the first Doctor Who stories I ever saw, BBC video-wise, and really enjoyed. And yet the overall era and Pertwee himself never made a dent in my affections, to the point where about, 4 or 5 years ago, I was talking to Doc Hume over at Diddley Dum, and we cooked up this idea we called Project Pertwee, and I was going to go and watch every episode, and then he and I would talk about it, and, he would try and get me into Pertwee. It was that bad. And it's only been over these last 5 years that I've gone back and watched a lot of his stuff again and gotten into it. In fact, after watching 2 or 3 seasons, I thought, good grief, I can be a bit of an ass to people if they deserve it. And I like wine and cheese. And at the time, I was tooling around in this open-top car, and I like gadgets. And I thought, oh my God, I am Pertwee. Maybe familiarity is breeding contempt. I don't know. But, look, Pertwee is well up in my estimations these days. But it's hard, though, isn't it? There are now 13 Doctors, 14 if we include Hurt. More if we include the other sort of fantasy ones that Big Finish has thrown around. It makes lists kind of hard to do now. So when I say Pertwee is up there in my estimations, I'm not putting a number on it. If a Doctor is at number 8, what does it mean for the Doctor at number 11? And how much better are they for the Doctor at number 4? It used to mean a lot back in the day when we only had 4 or 5 Doctors. So now I just say, look, Pertwee's up there, but I'm not going to put a number on him.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you talk about that journey, because having been involved in fandom now for 25 or more years, must be 30 something years.
Yeah.
Never mind, a long time. Going back to the 80s as a very small boy. I can kind of remember, particularly coming out of the UK, the real ebbs and flows of the Pertwee popularity. When I was first involved in fandom in the late 80s, early 90s, in the UK, the Pertwee era was kind of regarded as this mythic classic era, because many of the people who were opinion makers had been kids during the Pertwee era, and it was the New Colour era, and it hadn't been repeated in the UK, so it was just this sort of mythic sort of thing. Then the new sort of hard-edged reviewers, people like the Paul Cornells, came along, and they sort of started to watch a few of these Pertwees on VHS, and copies went around, and they started to find all the flaws, and it became kind of trendy to bash Pertwee. And in the late 90s, it was a real sort of thing to sort of show you're cool and you're edgy by bashing Pertwee. And then I think as things sort of came back to an equilibrium, there has been a growth in regard for him. His era, though, I do concede, is not a perfect one by any means. I think that what the team does, we'll talk about the team right in a moment, what the team does is they do push the quality of the show up. I think the highs are higher than we've seen before. I think the average is up in some ways, particularly compared to the Troughton era, but it still has some quite low lows that come in there, and it's really not until Hinchcliffe that those lows are sort of raised a bit as well. And yeah, shall we get on with talking about the era?
Let's do it.
So when we talk about the Pertwee era, I think we really need to be saying that we're talking about the Pertwee, Letts, Dix era, because this is the most stable production team we get. Basically, once Sherman hands over to Letts officially with the Silurians, Pertwee's second story, you get a producer for 5 full seasons the same script editor for 5 full seasons, the same lead actor. Joe Grant is there for 3 of those seasons. You get regulars like Nicholas Courtney playing the Brigadier throughout those seasons. There is a huge stability, and what's also really clear is that the producer, the script editor, and the lead actor all got on and all were working together to create a direction and a vision and an outcome. And I think that's something that really has to be said right at the top and really defines this era.
Absolutely agreed. I mean, you contrast it with New Who. We've only had, 3 showrunners, and one of them's only done 1 series so far. But when you hear some of the behind-the-scenes stories and look at why certain series in the modern era have gone awry, it's because the production team's been in disarray. It has a massive effect on what happens on screen.
Absolutely. You certainly got a lot of chopping and changing in the Troughton era, which I think comes through then. In the 80s, okay, you get the stability of JNT and Eric Saywood for a long period together, but with different doctors, and let's face it, not getting on and not working towards the same vision. I mean, in the Colin Baker era, the producer, the script editor, and the lead actor were all working on their own different visions and not remotely in sync. So this is really important. I think the Hinchcliffe Holmes, Tom Baker era does it again, but again only for 3 years. So this is a really big, stable part of the show. And look, I'm not somebody who assesses everything by ratings. I don't think that you can judge a show by ratings alone, but it is the era that locks Doctor Who into being a long-running cult classic, but not cult in the niche sense, cult in the everyone in the UK is watching this. It's a big part of the zeitgeist. And over the course of its 5 seasons, basically the Pertwee era adds 500,000 viewers every year, and overall they build the ratings up by 2.5 million. It ends up averaging just below 9 million viewers, so season 11 averages just under 9 million viewers. Its highs are obviously much higher. It's getting 10s, it's getting 11s occasionally. It gets into the top 20 on a much more regular basis than it ever has before, and sets up the Hinchcliffe era to start getting 10s and 11s regularly.
Yeah, that paints a very good picture, I think, Dave, because back in those days, there wasn't much to watch on UK television. There weren't many channels, so you weren't really spoiled for choice. So in some ways, some of these big viewing figures that old Doctor Who episodes used to get were sort of born of that to some degree. You know, it was only one of a few options people had. But at the same time, the flip side of that coin is what you've just said. To grow the audience year on year is still quite significant, regardless of what choices people have.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I'm less interested, I think, in the number as I am in the growth of the number. To add 2.5 million and basically go from sort of low 6s to high 8s across the course of 5 years is a really good thing. There's not a lot of shows that actually grow 5 years in a row. They might peak and then sort of start to drift off, but that's a really good sign of how well it connected with the public. And part of why it connected with the public is obviously Jon Pertwee himself, someone who I don't think a lot of people in 1969 would have been expecting to be the Doctor in the new season.
No, I mean, this guy known for being, well, a comedian, Dave, doing comedic sort of turns on radio and things and in film. You know, how could he possibly play this serious Doctor character? And yet he comes on and plays a very serious Doctor, and it's a real sort of turn. It reminds me of when other comedians have gone and done roles that are, you know, perhaps more serious in nature, and they're often very good at it.
Yeah, I think about Jon Pertwee's guest starring appearance in the Avengers episode from Venus with Love, where he's only got a small part, but they've clearly gone for an actor who can do comedy, not in the sense of slapstick and sort of funny voices, but just who has this wonderful, inscrutable comic timing and can throw himself around and do that sort of thing. But then in the Navy Lark, which he did for radio, he's doing lots of very radio-style comic voices. But that sense of performance, I think, is what he really brings to the role. And he makes the Doctor someone that you have to watch and you find interesting.
Oh, absolutely. And his Doctor has a kind of an arc. I mean, we talk about more modern Doctors, like what they tried to do with Colin Baker, or what they did more successfully with Peter Capaldi. I think that the Jon Pertwee Doctor has a bit of an arc too. Season 7 is very, very serious, and his Doctor gets a bit more fun and open, perhaps, as the years go on.
There is, and the production team did very deliberately transition both him as a character, in terms of the way he related to his companions, and he got different sorts of companions that brought out different aspects of his personality, but also the way that his Doctor would go. When they inherited the show, Sherman had made this decision to strand the Doctor on Earth, and Letts and Dix have said on record they're not particular fans of that decision, and that it left them with limited story capacity. But they didn't just reverse it. They then decided, well, let's have this thing where the Doctor starts with his whole first season on Earth, and then in his next season he gets away from Earth once, then he gets away from Earth a couple of times, then in his 4th season he gets his ability to travel back, and he's going to be back off Earth on a regular basis, but brings it back home again for his 5th season. So that is very deliberate. The way that they bring regular characters in and out is very deliberate. This is a very planned era.
Question without notice, because I'm not sure it'll pop up naturally in the rest of our discussion. The Time Lords exiling him to Earth. Did you ever find that quite weird in the way that, they acknowledge that he meddles in the affairs of other planets, so they strand him on the planet he seems to meddle most in?
The answer is no, because I came to the show through the Pertwee era, that just seemed to me to be natural.
Right, okay.
And then when I sort of did see the War Games and I got exactly what was going on, it again seemed perfectly natural to me that if you're going to strand this guy anywhere, at least do it where he kind of enjoys hanging out.
Yeah, that's a very kind sort of way to do it. I just find it funny that he meddles a lot on Earth, so here, we'll strand you on the planet you meddle most in.
But then, when you go through the era, and one of the big tropes of the era, and the excuse they use regularly to get the Doctor off Earth, is the Time Lords do want to interfere, and they can't be seen to do it, but if we just sort of quietly send the Doctor along, then that's okay, because, Colony in Space, Curse of Peladon, the Mutants, I'm sure I'm forgetting a couple. There are a number of ones where he goes off on a mission for the Time Lords.
Yeah, true.
So, Rob, I just want to talk a little bit about what it is that Barry Letts does for Doctor Who, because I think that this is the era where we start to become that golden, important part of the UK's television landscape. I think Dalek Mania has come and gone, and that was important, but this is where it becomes a real thing. So a couple of points I just want to make, if you'll indulge me for a moment, please.
Sure.
One of the things we have to mention is the budget. In the past, Doctor Who has always struggled with its budget. And the budget at the BBC is obviously derived from television licenses. So in the UK, if you want to have a television, there's basically a hypothecated tax, which is the TV license, and you pay that tax to own a TV, and it goes to the BBC, and the BBC uses it to make whatever they want to make. Of course, at the point where the Jon Pertwee era is coming out, colour television is coming on board. And the licence fee for a colour television is not just a little bit more, 10% more than a black and white one. It is significantly more than it is for a black and white television, significantly more. So what that means is, as people are, over the 5 years of the Pertwee era, switching over from a black and white set to a colour set, they are paying a significantly higher licence fee, which means money is just pouring into the BBC. They're still making the same number of hours of programming, and yes, there are some other costs involved with the whole colour production, but suddenly the BBC's budget increases significantly. So what that means is that when Barry Letts goes over budget by 30% at the end of season 7, rather than the BBC saying, well, that's a real problem, we haven't got the money, they're like, that's fine, we'll just up your budget by that much, that's fine, have a bit more cash. So at the end of season 8, he goes over by 30%. That's fine, we'll just increase your budget. And this just happens across the 5 years. He basically doubles Doctor Who's budget over 5 years because the BBC can afford it. The problem that comes down the future is that when Philip Hinchcliffe does the same, most people are already on colour sets, the economy's not going as well, inflation becomes a problem later, and so there isn't the money to compensate. But Barry Letts says, he found Doctor Who a poor program and left it a very rich one, and it was a very well-budgeted program by the end of his era.
So he was kind of the Augustus of Doctor Who. Augustus found
Yes.
Rome in, what was it, in wood?
In clay and left it in marble, yes.
That's the one, yes.
That's right, he really was. Letts is also very, very canny at how he does the production. He and I don't know whether this was him and Sherman or a combination of them both, but they cut Doctor Who back from being sort of 50 episodes a year to 25, 26, which means you're making less program with more money. And also between them, Sherman does the 7-parters. Letts and Dicks don't like that. They pull it back all the way to 6-parters. But again, this idea of if you're only making 5 stories a year, because you've got 3 6-parters usually and 2 4-parters or some combination thereof, you can spend more per story and you can amortize things across the cost across the course of a story. So a 6-parter has more budget. Letts is very good at how he uses his location filming to have expensive stories and cheaper stories. You look at something like the Carnival of Monsters. The way that is designed is there are 2 recording blocks and all of the cast is only required for 1 recording block. You're either on Into Minor or you're on the ship, and the 2 never meet. So you only have to hire the cast for half the time.
Yeah. And look, I just want to say they really go to town with this episode sort of situation in season 7 particularly. I mean, we think of seasons that have 4 stories as being like something that the McCoy era did. Oh my God, Doctor Who's dying. It's only got 4 stories in a season. But this first Pertwee series only had 4 stories in it too.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think as much as I love those stories, and I do think that the 7 parts do force the production team, particularly the writers, to add more and really add a level of depth to a story that otherwise wouldn't be there. That is very long. I think you do need more variety in a season. The final Barry Letts point I want to make right at the top here, and this is a Letts Terrance Dicks point, is he's also the first to really get this idea of a formal season with a big opener and a big closer. So you look at the openers they have. Okay, Spearhead was Derek Sherman, but that's the new Doctor and it's an alien invasion. That's a big deal. You then get to season 8. They have the launch of the big new arch rival for the Doctor with a Radio Times cover, and everyone's going to tune in to see who this master guy is and what's going on. Season 9, they bring the Daleks back because that's how you open a new season. You get the Daleks in. Season 10, they open with 3 Doctors.
Yeah.
Season 11, not quite the same. I think they would have used a bit of the Liz Sladen casting to get in there, but certainly for those first 4 seasons, they've got that big, exciting premiere story that is going to get the viewers in, and then they end with a big unit family exciting adventure that sort of brings in everything together. The demons, the Time Monster, the Green Death, and Planet of the Spiders all have that sense of, right, we're going to wrap the season up, wrap the themes up, and have all the cast you love back here. So again, stuff that we are doing now in Doctor Who, Letts really was the pioneer of.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you look across those opening stories, it's very true. When you get to season 11, gosh, wouldn't that have been good if it opened with Invasion of the Dinosaurs or something?
Well, yes.
That's probably the only misstep in terms of having big openers. But we're not talking about season 11. We're going to go back, I guess, Dave, to season 7.
We will. So what we're going to do, Rob, is we're going to talk about each season briefly, interspersed with a more general topic. Season 7, I think most listeners will know, is my favourite season. So therefore, I might hand over to you to give us your first thoughts.
Yeah, well, look, my first thoughts kicked off a few minutes ago where I commented that this is a season from the classic era that only has 4 stories to it. And those stories are all, bar the first one, particularly long stories, which may be one of the reasons why I found it hard to get into the Pertwee era initially. But they are very strong stories. Spearhead from Space in particular. When you look at that, all shot on film, grab the Blu-ray, folks, if you don't have it. It is absolutely fantastic. It feels like a television film from that era. I won't go as far to say it's cinematic, but it feels very much like a shot-for-TV movie. I think it's just wonderful. Thumbs up. Silurians, I know you love it, Dave. I'm not as fond of it. But yeah, it's quite good. Ambassadors of Death I've always had a thing for, and Inferno is a stone cold classic. So although there's only 4 stories here, I am pretty wrapped with this season too.
Oh, well, look, it is my favourite season because it has got 4, in my view, classic stories. I think they are all utterly brilliant. They are all very different. And you can see in this one, the production team is very quickly trying to grapple with this idea of what do we do when we have the Doctor stranded on Earth. Famously, it was Malcolm Hulke who said to Terrence Dicks, well, that's a terrible idea. You've only got 2 plot lines, alien invasion or mad scientist. So very quickly, yes, there are a couple of alien invasions in there, and there is a mad scientist in there, but very quickly they said to Mark Hulke, right, well, you give us your twist. And his twist is the aliens were here first. They get to Inferno, and they say, well, let's not have it on the Earth, let's have it on a parallel Earth. Even Ambassadors of Death, the alien invasion turns out not to be an alien invasion at all. And if anything, we are the aggressors. So it is very innovative. I love Liz Shaw, and we'll talk about the companions in their own little segment shortly, but I do love Liz Shaw. I love the way the Brigadier is used here. I love the way Unit is portrayed here. But again, it has this feel as though money has been spent, and it looks really good. Spearhead from Space, I agree, is the standout. There were problems in terms of the production with this one, and where some other producers may have just rolled over. Derek Sherwin, who was still the producer for this story, did say, well, if you can't give me this, this and this, give me a whole bunch of film and I'll go do it all on location. And the BBC said, you're crazy, you can't do that. He said, you watch me.
Yeah.
And he did, and it's gorgeous.
Oh, it is unbelievable. You know, the first time I sat down and seriously watched that, I just couldn't believe how good it looked.
Yeah, absolutely. So, look, a lot of love from me for this season. I think Pertwee is very different and very interesting. He's not yet the lovable uncle that we kind of think of by the end of his run, but he is, I think, for a nerdy young boy, that very interesting sort of into tech and into gadgets and into science, and really pushes that love of science in a way that I think is really effective. The downside of the season, of course, is that, look, in Australia, it wasn't a problem. 7-part story, that's 1.5 weeks, who cares? In the UK, having to watch a story for almost 2 months to get a conclusion, I can see where that would be a problem.
Oh, absolutely. It's incredibly long. And, you know, I know you can sit through them quite easily, Dave, but there are times where I'm watching them and I'm thinking, oh my God, how many more episodes to get to the end?
Yeah, look, I understand that.
Especially on limited sets as well.
Yeah, look, that's true as well. I mean, I think the 7-parters do allow for a lot more location filming, but you're right. They do get quite dull sometimes if they don't have a twist in them. We'll move then to our first general topic, and that is UNIT, the United Nations Intelligence Task Force. I am a big fan of UNIT, and I think the reason why UNIT works well in the Pertwee era, better than it does, I think, anywhere else in the series, particularly the new series, and I'm not saying that to bash it, I will come back to that point, is that it is being written and produced by people who in many cases have served in the military, or if they haven't, they are students of the military, like Douglas Camfield, or they're people who around the Christmas table would have been parents, uncles, aunts, grandmas, grandfathers who served in World War I, World War II, or did national service, that sort of thing. So people get the military. And I contrast that, again, not to have a go at, but simply to make the point, most of the people who write for and produce New Who, I expect have got almost no experience, certainly first-hand experience of the military. And as somebody who has served in the military in the past, that really does show to me. But it shows here how well it works. The Brigadier is a really good character who has a bit of personality. He's also very much a typical up-and-coming military officer. Yates is very much the young, sort of upper-middle-class, maybe junior aristocratic younger son who went along to Sandhurst to become an officer. Benton is the guy you can imagine leaving school at 15 and just joining the army as a private and working his way up to sergeant, and well, he gets to warrant officer by the Tom Baker era. It falls down a little bit in terms of the fact that on Doctor Who's budget, we don't quite have the cast to show a realistic military organisation. You know, there would be significant layers between a brigadier and a captain, for example, and even, well, I guess the relationship between Yates and Benton isn't too bad. A captain would have a sergeant that they would work very closely to, and all the rest of that. And you know, it does work. They do salute correctly. I mean, there's talks about, John Levine talks about Douglas Camfield taking him and the others aside and going, right, before we take this, let me teach you guys how to bloody salute.
That's great. And look, just to pick up on something you were saying about the production teams making this, I agree with you. I think it's obvious there was more of a military background to the earlier Who production teams, just by the nature of the eras. I also think it just shows a broader change in society.
Yes.
Where today I think the military people want to mistrust it, second guess it, etc. It's the same with police forces around the world. I don't want to get up on a soapbox here, but I think back in 1970 you could have a hero who was a brigadier, much more so than you could do it successfully today, for example, in a children's television show.
No, absolutely. And look, let's say the questioning by society of the use of military force is a good thing. I don't think either of us are saying it's not, but you're right. The sense of establishment is very strong in the Pertwee era.
That's it, yeah.
But yeah, look, I like all the characters. The Brigadier gets good stories. He gets a couple of bad stories. I think the Three Doctors is his low point.
What do you think of his costume in this season, Dave?
I really like it. I know it gets a lot of criticism, not least from Barry Letts, who hated it and in the next season switched them all into traditional army costumes, but it does give the era what they're going for, which is this sense of this is not contemporary, this is in the not too distant future. It's where Britain has gone a little bit further, it has advanced. It has a space program. There's an extra BBC channel. All those sort of things I think are really clever, and that slightly more futuristic take on a military uniform I think is really good. I know I'm in the minority there.
Indeed. But Dave, that is a beautiful segue into what I want to talk about next, which is the unit dating controversy. And I know I don't mean Mike Yates' interest in Joe Grant when it comes to dating. I mean the way in which, as you say, this era is portrayed, suggested as being in the future. I mean, as far back as the Invasion, another unit story, albeit with the Second Doctor, people were being told that this was in 1975. It's not said explicitly in the story, but the production office was giving, I think, the continuity announcers the information that this was 1975, this was in the future, this is where UNIT operates. I think of Doctor Who and the Dinosaur Invasion, which is the target novelisation of that story. They say it happens in 1977. Mm-hmm. What else? Sarah Jane Smith in Pyramids of Mars, a Tom Baker story, says she comes from 1980. Yet, Mordrin Undead explicitly is set in 1977 and 1983, and by 1977 the Brigadier is out of unit. So you've got to assume, don't you, that the most canon reference we have to this era is Mordrin Undead, and that suggests that the Brigadier was doing this stuff pre-1977.
That is correct. The only thing you can say about the unit dating controversy is that it pretty much works in the Pertwee era. The only reason why it doesn't work is Mordrin Undead, and that's not the Pertwee era's fault. I mean, there are issues with it in the Pertwee era. For example, they didn't know at the time that they made the Mind of Evil that Mao Zedong wasn't long for this world. And so, couldn't have been alive in 10 years' time or in 7 years' time or whenever it's meant to be set. Well, maybe in the Doctor Who universe, Mao Zedong had a better doctor and does live a few extra years. I don't think it matters. What does matter is the intention of the production team does make it to screen. That is, that this is in the future. And what that means is that Britain can have a space program, that international relations can be a bit different to what they are now. And it does allow for a more interesting and innovative era. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, the space program one is the big one, because even now, 40, almost 50 years later, Britain still hasn't done anything remotely like what's being portrayed here. So it's very unrealistic to sort of see this as a real sort of example of even mid 70s or early 80s or whatever people might want to say Doctor Who is. I guess it was the intent of that early 80s production team to try and get some continuity into Doctor Who and make some timelines up and so on, which does give us what should be, I think, the definitive take on the era when we look back on it. But you're right, before 1983 came along in the Peter Davison era, we were kind of left adrift that this just was in a future sort of time. That's when it was being set. That's
right, and we'll discuss the world building more a little bit later in the podcast. The final point I just want to make out of that is I guess it does also show where we were in 1970. We had just had the first moon landing. There were going to be future moon landings. And this sense that space exploration was now just going to accelerate rather than, as we know, kind of peter out in the mid-70s is really, really obvious. And I think that it does show what we thought our future was going to be like and didn't turn out to be like.
Yeah, indeed.
We'll move on then to Season 8, which I'm a big fan... This is going to become a little bit repetitive. I'm a big fan of all these seasons. They're all great seasons. Season 8, though, is the one that kind of beds down what we think of as being the Pertwee era. It introduces Katie Manning as Jo Grant. It puts the unit organisation into a more... Not background, but into a more stable sort of idea. We get this idea the Doctor goes off-world once or twice a season. And, of course, we introduce the Master, who turns up in all 5 stories. Now, Rob, as a kid, I don't remember ever thinking, oh my God, it's the Master story again, 5 in a row, what's going on? You just don't think of that as a kid. You know, every story is its own story, and you don't really put them into a continuity. And so I didn't care. Has it ever been a problem for you?
It's never been a problem for me, Dave, but it does sort of highlight that this is, for the first time, I think, in Doctor Who, so we're talking season 8, so there's been 7 previous seasons. This is the first time I think Doctor Who starts to feel, and I'm going to use a term that may get your back up, but I'm going to use it, it gets a bit soap opera-ish, in terms of you have these recurring characters, like the Master, or like Unit. Some people still don't regard the Unit guys as being companions. They're more like recurring characters in this story.
Yeah, I agree with that, yeah.
The Doctor's based out of this one location on the whole, like Unit headquarters, broadly. The show sort of becomes a week-to-week soap opera-ish type thing. And in that vein, I don't think it's weird that the Master's always popping up, because in a soap opera, you have the same characters popping up all the time. So, although it's not a soap opera in the terms of, Home and Away or Neighbours is a soap opera, I think it has some of the style of a soap opera, and that's how we get this Unit family vibe sort of building up, particularly in this season. Am I wrong?
You're not wrong. I think soap opera is not necessarily the right term.
I knew to get you back up.
Yeah, because it comes with certain connotations, and I get why you use it, and I appreciate that. You're not wrong, though, in terms of the fact that there are characters now that, in addition to the Doctor and his companion, do turn up again and again and again, and therefore we can develop their characters, therefore the actor's portrayal does bleed into their characters. The Brigadier becomes more and more Nick Courtney's character, and Nick Courtney takes it in a particular direction. The Doctor and the Brigadier can have a developing and ongoing relationship. Jo and Mike can have a ongoing, in inverted commas, relationship. But the way that the characters interact with each other is important. We will talk about the Master as his own segment in a moment, so I'm going to park that and just say I don't think there are 5 out of 5 classics in this era, but I think they're all pretty good. Terror of the Autons, I think, is a very underrated story. I really, really like it. Mind of Evil, again, ignored by a lot of fans because it did exist only in black and white for a very long time, but very well directed, very well written. Claws of Axos is, in my mind, the weaker of the season. I don't really get that one. Colony in Space, I really enjoy. I think the world building in that is really good. The characters are really good. It's a Malcolm Hulke story. I think although they've made a decision to sort of do the production in these sort of drab pastels to try and give a particular feel, which I think is the right decision, that does make it look a lot duller than it really is. I really like it. And I'm a big fan of the Demons. What about you, Rob? How does Season 8 sit for you as a set of stories?
Oh, look, I completely agree on Terror of the Autons. To me, this has always had such an iconic look, with the Autons with those big heads and the yellow blazers, and, the way the Master looks in that story. You see a still from that story and you're like, oh my God, that's iconic. That's amazing looking. So yeah, I've never understood why it's underrated with people. Yeah,
this is Robert Holmes doing what we would now think to be classic Robert Holmes, which is how do we scare the buggers to death? And the set pieces and the imagery are done really, really well. And again, they've got the budget to have those few more extras, that bit of location filming, those proper stunts being done. I mean, famously, the Auton being smashed by a car down a cliff, rolling down and then just getting up. Really good sequences. Everything's working well for this story.
Yeah, look, Mind of Evil, I've liked as an adult. Even as an adult, it still scares me when they have that riot scene. The noise and the cacophony of that riot. It's like, oh my God, this is like a real riot. It's incredible.
Yeah, I also remember being quite scared by Mind of Evil because it did seem very real and very gritty. Plus the killer machine, that the noise and the effect was really good, but it could just pop up anywhere.
Exactly right. Claws of Axos, I agree, is a bit weird, and shoehorning the Master in there is extra weird. Yes. So, a bit iffy on that. Colony in Space, I've got to say I was always a little bit bored by, but The Demons is one of my favourite stories, as I mentioned at the top of this episode. So on the whole, I think Season 8 is pretty solid. Having
said that, let's talk about the Master.
Yes.
I think that the Master's involvement in all these stories works. And I also think there's a real arc that goes across the Master's character in Season 8. So if you'll, again, indulge me just for a little bit of a personal headcanon theory.
Please.
The Master turns up in Terror of the Autons, and we know that he's somebody that the Doctor has interacted with back in his, academy days or university days. It's implied that although the Master got his qualification, his Master's, if you like, at a higher level than the Doctor's, the Doctor sort of plodded along and eventually became a Doctor, which is a more advanced qualification. So it implies that one was naturally gifted and quick academically, and the other was more involved and long. So very different sort of personalities.
Do you think, just to butt in, do you think it's kind of like Mozart and Salieri and how they're portrayed in Amadeus?
I think that actually is a very good comparison, yeah.
Yeah.
So you get that relationship set up right from the start, and the Doctor, when he's told the Master is coming easy, like, that jackanapes, all he does is cause trouble. There isn't the sense of him being this particularly evil, world-destroying guy. He's just a guy that likes to come up and mess with the Doctor. And Terror of the Autons is just the Master coming along and messing with the Doctor, and kind of like, hey, remember how we used to, make fun of each other at university and, had this antagonism? Let's just carry this on out in the universe. People criticise the Terror of the Autons because the Master's plan is abandoned very quickly, but that makes sense if the Master actually doesn't really care about the Nestines per se. He's just using them to help mess with the Doctor.
Yeah, exactly right. He's pranking the Doctor on a global scale or a countrywide scale.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Mind of Evil, he's stuck on Earth, so he goes and does a few things that's going to sort of keep him interested and cause a bit of havoc, and I think as well, again, just mess with the Doctor and obviously try to get his dematerialization circuit back. The Claws of Axos, he's gone out in the universe, and it's Axos that captures him, and he says, well, look, don't kill me. I can take you somewhere that's got some awesome stuff for you to do. I know this place called Earth, let's go. And the Master spends his whole time in the Claws of Axos just wanting to get out of there.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, he is shoehorned in there, but the way you describe his role in the story, yeah, that still makes sense.
It does. Plus, of course, because the Doctor's inside Axos for a lot of time, we get the Master interacting with Unit, and his relationship with the Brigadier is really good. He gets all the best lines in the story about, you might as well try and fly a second-hand gas stove, or, well, I suppose you could take the usual precautions against nuclear explosion, sticky tape on the windows. So I like that, but then in Colony in Space is where I think it all changes. Because the big climax of Colony in Space is the Master and the Doctor having taken control of the Doomsday Machine. And the Master says, let's share the universe between us. And that offer is absolutely genuine. He clearly has a regard for the Doctor. He clearly wants the Doctor's admiration. And he wants nothing more than he and the Doctor to go around and fix the universe. And the Master, even here, is talking about you can bring order to the universe. We can end conflict. We can govern the universe in a really benevolent and effective way. And the Master obviously wants power out of that as well. But the Doctor thinks about it. But at the moment where the Doctor says, I don't want this, I don't want to do this with you, I'm rejecting you, from then on, I think it's where you see the Master go, right, I no longer want the Doctor's admiration. He's almost like, I don't want to use this term because it comes loaded, but like a spurned lover.
Yeah. Now look, Dave, question without notice again. There is a Peter Capaldi story you're not very fond of at all. in which the Master, or Missy, tries to give the Doctor a cyber army. I can draw a direct through line from this story we're talking about in the Pertwee era and the Master, what he wants to do, to that story. And even though you don't like that Capaldi story, I can see the Master's intent as being the same in both stories.
I agree. I think the way it's handled is phenomenally different and far, far, far less effective in the latter one.
Well, indeed.
Yeah, but yes, that is a very valid line to draw. And then we end up with the Demons, where he does just want to destroy the Doctor. So I think there is this arc of this turning point. He goes off, he gets put into prison, then he escapes, he goes off into space. We see him far less frequently. But after Colony in Space, he is just about, how can I get power, how can I conquer the universe, and how can I destroy the Doctor? And so there is a growth and change. The final point I'll make before I hand over to you, Rob, because I have spoken for a bit, is I've got to say, as a kid, I can still remember every time there was that moment of, Fasculus is the Greek word for master. I just got, oh my god, wow, that's so clever. And so I always love those moments. Rob, I've spoken for a bit. What do you think of all that?
Yeah, look, I'm completely on the same page with you, Dave. And although I made the Mozart and Salieri analogy earlier, which was just something that came to me, and it does seem like a good one now. I think the obvious one to talk about is the Sherlock Holmes Moriarty comparisons. You know, no one ever complains when Moriarty pops up in Sherlock Holmes stories, so, you know, no one should really complain when the Master pops up in Season 8 stories here. I think the combination of what the character represents, this foil for the Doctor, in a way we haven't really seen before, except maybe in a small way in the Time Meddler, you know, as being another yes. Time Lord, sort of messing around with things. It's a first, and I think Roger Delgado is just such a wonderful actor. You know, it's hard to make a podcast like this without just treading over the same territory as many, many books, many, many podcasts. But the voice, the eyes, the look, the costume, it all just comes together so well. He is iconic here in Season 8.
He is, and works perfectly as a foil for Pertwee.
Yeah, absolutely agree.
And don't forget, although he's in all 5 stories in Season 8, he is only in 3 of the 10 stories from Seasons 9 and 10.
Oh, exactly. He does really drop off. That's a very unfortunate term. He does sort of disappear after being so strong in this season, but that's okay too. I think it's good to have this strong opening and then be used sparingly in the future seasons.
Rob, do you want to take us through Season 9?
Season 9, Dave, 1972, kicking off with Day of the Daleks, which, again, at the top of this show I mentioned as being one of the early BBC videos, so one of the first Pertwee stories I probably saw like multiple times in a row, and so that one really imprinted on my mind, and it's a good story to boot, which is great, followed by The Curse of Peladon, which, as people will famously say, is the better of the two Peladon tales.
And it is.
And it is, into the Sea Devils, where we get the Silurians back and these new critters called we call them the Sea Devils. The Mutants, which is maybe not so good. And then the Time Monster, which is one of those Pertwee stories that gets panned, perhaps even to a greater degree as something like Terror of the Autons, but which I've always had a lot of time for based on the Target novel. So again, a pretty solid season for me. Most of the stories here, I think, are really, really fantastic.
I think it does show the variety that the Pertwee era is now developing. Day of the Daleks, you have the whole alternative futures thing, which is really clever and really interesting. Curse of Peladon, you go off to a new world, and it's a very interesting world. The Sea Devils is back with a recurring monster, but a completely different take, plus the Master. The Mutants is one of the 2 Pertwees that I think is absolutely terrible. I know that is not a universally shared view of the story, but I think it looks terrible. The plot makes no sense. The characters are awful. The acting's awful. It's got. I just don't think it works at all. But I respect that there are people who do like it, and certainly the messages that they're trying to put through are worthy. Time Monster for me is a beast of 3 parts. I do think parts 1 and 2 on Earth are, and to an extent part 3, are kind of terrible. Part 4 in the TARDIS, with the Doctor of the Master's TARDIS, steps up, and that's actually quite good and a really good interaction. Parts 5 and 6 in Atlantis, I think, are actually really, really good. They are much better written, they're much better cast. You get all the stuff with Dalios, you get all the stuff with the Master and Galea, and then the final destruction of Atlantis. I think that it builds towards a good outcome, but the first half is kind of ratty.
Dave, this is the first of the Pertwee seasons we're talking about here that has the Daleks in it. It's been a while since we last saw them.
It is, and it is the production team bringing them back and wanting to use them for that big season opener. I think that this is a difficult one because it's a very good story. I think Day of the Daleks is a really good story with terrible use of the Daleks. The Daleks will get far better usage, I think, in the next two Pertwee stories they're in, which is a shame. But after quite a gap in terms of Dalek stories, it is a little bit of a rough comeback for them. And their appearance is carried along by the rest of the plot, which really doesn't involve them.
Yeah, and look, I raised the Daleks in part because I want to compare and contrast them with the other big Doctor Who baddie, the Cybermen. Obviously, the Daleks hadn't popped up in Doctor Who for a long time. You know, Troughton got some early Dalek stories, and then they sort of shuffled off. And it had been a while, as we say, this is Pertwee's third series that they appear in. Conversely, the Cybermen had sort of appeared all through Troughton to the degree that the production team here... Well, it's no spoiler to say this, even though we haven't spoken about season 10 or 11 yet. The Cybermen don't turn up at all in Pertwee's era, aside from, I think, when he's having a flashback to something, we see a Cyberman briefly. Your thoughts, Dave, on that? Pertwee obviously gets 3 good Dalek stories, but no Cyberman stories.
Look, I think it's a shame. I think I'd like to see how Pertwee would handle the Cybermen, but the production team wasn't interested in using them, and I guess it would actually have been a bad outcome if they just felt, okay, well, I guess we need to put a Cyberman story in here, and their heart wasn't in it. So if their heart wasn't in it, it's probably better that they don't do it.
Yeah, look, that's a very fair and valid answer. I do find it a shame, though. I would have been fascinated to see Pertwee up against them, probably because I'm just a Cyberman fanboy more than anything.
No, look, I understand that. It would have been nice for it to happen, but I guess the fact that they didn't do it maybe says it maybe wouldn't have been as nice as we imagine.
Yeah, very, very true.
I want to have a quick chat now about the world building of the era, and I've got 2 points to make here, but they both stem from, again, that production team stability that we spoke about earlier, where you've got Letts and Dix over 5 years building a continuity, and they are the first production team to really build a continuity. The 2 aspects are the contemporary world and the future. It's amazing looking back now for a show in the 1970s that they actually have a genuine sort of take on what the future of Earth is going to look like that bleeds through a number of seasons. You get this idea of Frontier in Space doing the first expansion of Earth, going out there, conquering the frontier, sort of like conquering, the west of America and the New World, going out there, sometimes making a hash of it, getting into conflicts they shouldn't and all the rest of it, but mankind reaching out there. Colony in Space, you get a look at what that sort of looks like at its peak, with some people going off and being parts of big corporations and big companies and corruption, and others wanting to go off and colonize worlds, and that's really good. And then in the Mutants, this idea of the Empire contracting and getting too big and falling apart, and all the dates line up and all these ideas line up, so that's really clever. At the same time, all the contemporary stories, you get a sense of what the geopolitics of the Pertwee era is. The way that the UK interacts with China and with Peking. The way that the peace conferences are happening. Like, this feels like a consistent world in both senses. And that, to me, is a really incredible thing for 1970s television.
Oh, absolutely. It's sort of, mimicking the real world. I mean, we say the modern era. We say that New Who picks up on themes from the modern world. But I don't think it does it half as well or to the degree that this Pertwee era was doing. When I look back on it. No,
and the way that they address contemporaneous issues. I mean, ecology is absolutely something that winds its way through the Pertwee era in a way that I think is thought-provoking without ever being too heavy-handed.
Yeah, I mean, this thought that, and we touched on this briefly earlier, that Pertwee is this establishment figure and, people weren't that into him. I've always looked at this era and thought, no, he's not establishment. He does have a posh voice and he likes cheese and wine, but he's always opposed to, these sort of ecological vandal type people and such. He's always on a completely different sort of side to the establishment. He's always arguing with a man from the ministry, so to speak. It's quite strange that people could think he is very, very establishment.
Absolutely, and the era continues to invite us to contrast parochial idiots from the ministry with outwardly thinking internationalists. So international alliances, whether it's the United Nations or peace treaties or working together as a world, is shown to be a very positive, very liberal sort of thing in the Pertwee era, whereas parochialism and isolationism are not.
That's correct, yes.
And that, again, without thumping us over the head, is a part of this world that we do build. And look, Pertwee, as a member of the establishment, it kind of sort of comes from the fact that he does like to sit in a gentleman's club and eat cheese and wine. But if I'd been exiled away from my home and I had the opportunity to go somewhere and eat cheese and drink wine, I probably would as well. I don't blame him for that.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of this Doctor's personality that he probably doesn't want to be bothered too much by people, and sitting in a gentleman's club probably does make a lot of sense, I completely get it. I've never thought he deserved the criticism for it, though, or the character, I should say, not Pertwee himself. The character deserved criticism for it. Quite strange to me.
Yes, and I think a lot of it does come from that exchange in Terror of the Autons where he name drops the senior civil servant, and I don't know whether he's bluffing there or not, but I certainly don't take that as a genuine my mate Tubby Brownrose. I kind of took it as either he's bluffing or, at some point while he's been enjoying a nice glass of, red and a good gorgonzola, he's happened to meet this guy and he thinks, well, I'll just name drop this guy. Because, look, the Doctor name drops a lot in this era. That's part of his character.
Yeah, agree.
Season 10, the 10th anniversary season, which opens with our 9 years and 2 month anniversary story, The Three Doctors.
I thought you'd bring that up.
We look back now, The Three Doctors as being the 10th anniversary story. That's not quite correct. It's the 10th anniversary season, and it is the opportunity where they do bring back Hartnell and Troughton for what I think is probably still my favourite multi-Doctor story. I think that...
Oh, that's a big call, Dave.
It's a big call, and I know you're a big fan of the Five Doctors, as am I. But I think that the interaction between Pertwee and Troughton, between Troughton and Benton, and even the interactions that William Hartnell gets with the others as well, I think just makes the best use of having multiple Doctors. The Five Doctors is great, but a lot of it is the Five Doctors on different missions that only come together at the end, whereas this really gives us a lot of great interplay between the Doctors, and I think is a really good story for it. It's a mythic story that builds the world a bit more and gives us the Time Lord. So look, I really like it. I like all of the stories in this. Carnival of Monsters is a fun Robert Holmes story. Frontier in Space is one of my favourites. A huge, epic space opera story with great monsters and great alien races, and the Master, I love it. Planet of the Daleks, I really enjoy. And as a 10th anniversary sort of celebration of the Daleks, I think it works really well. It's probably the weakest of that season, which says a lot about how good the season is, and the Green Death is really good. So, look, I've just pre-ordered my Season 10 Blu-ray, which is finally available for pre-order in Australia. It's coming out next month. I can't wait to smash out this season. For Jon Pertwee's 4th season to be so good just shows how well this era is going.
I'm not quite as effusive as you about this season, Dave, but I'm probably close. I think Three Doctors, Carnival of Monsters, and The Green Death are all stone-cold classics. Planet of the Daleks, yeah, not so good. It's Frontier in Space that's my sort of wild card here. A story I've never quite grasped. Not in terms of I don't understand it, but it's never grabbed me. I've never grabbed it. We've never embraced. It's an odd one, and it's actually going to be the first story I watch when that aforementioned box set lobs on my doorstep.
Well, let's make a point of getting your thoughts on that after you've seen it, because I'm really interested, because I'm a big fan. Planet of the Daleks, I get your comment. Do you at least find it fun?
Oh, of course. I mean, people in purple furry costumes and spray painting an invisible Dalek, it's fun. Yeah, I get that. And it's interesting to see Tals again and so on. But it's just not top tier Doctor Who, which I think Three Doctors, Carnival of Monsters, Green Death are, without a shadow of a doubt in my mind.
Look, fair enough. I'm a little bit more effusive, but that's okay. I think we can both agree they're fun.
Oh, I'm very close though, Dave. It's a pretty good season.
It is a very good season. Now, we haven't mentioned the companions, Rob. Do you want to lead a bit of a discussion on that?
I do, Dave. And before I go into... Well, I guess we'll talk about one companion in particular in a moment, but I wanted to talk about something broad, something we even touched on at the start of this conversation, and that's the Pertwee era, and this might throw you a bit, and chauvinism. Do you want to talk about that? Because I think up until this era, up until the Jo Grant companion, so we're already skipping over Liz Shaw, we'll get back to Liz Shaw in a moment. Up until Jo, I feel female companions on Doctor Who were usually pretty smart. They usually stood up to the Doctor pretty well, even going back to Barbara, the first female companion. Oh, I guess Susan was, but, the second female companion. She stood up to the Doctor. The way women were portrayed on Doctor Who was always very well done. Only probably Victoria was, a bit light and a bit of a screamer up until Jo. But when we get the Jo Grant character, and combined with the Pertwee Doctor's tendency to maybe be a bit patriarchal and condescending to everyone, it must be said, not just women, we get this sort of era, and Jo Grant's in it for 3 seasons, where I think the show sort of takes a bit of a turn that it hadn't really been in before. Terrance Dicks, I think, introduced Jo to be the girl who gets tied to the railway tracks. I think he introduced the Master to be the mustachioed, moustache-twirling villain, and so on. It's a very particular kind of story that's being told, and I just don't know if it just doesn't tip over into being a bit chauvinistic at times, even as Jo grows and gets better. And there are scenes later in her era where she'll even stand up to the Brigadier. She's not just this young operative in unit. She really knows her stuff. But even when she grows up like that, she still ends up being Mrs. Cliff Jones and thinking that Cliff Jones is a younger version of the Doctor. It's I don't want to bag the series, the era, because of this, but I do see this as a little bit of a theme that could be slightly problematic, and I thought it was maybe worth talking about as we talk about companions.
I think it's a good point. I don't entirely agree, and I think you're actually underselling Jo Grant quite a bit there. Mm-hmm. There's no doubt that after Liz Shaw's season, and I love Liz Shaw, I think she's a really good companion. It's good to see that sort of intelligence and that dynamic between them. But I understand the point that Terrance Dicks particularly has made, that she's not an audience identification figure. I must admit, as a kid, I didn't care. I just thought she was great. And also that you do need your companion to get into trouble for the sake of drama. Now, that doesn't mean that they have to be a peril monkey, and I don't think that Jo Grant is. I think Jo Grant is shown to be very naive, very green, but she's got a lot of talent. In her first story, she shows that her escapology is actually pretty good. She clues on to what the Doctor's talking about frequently far better than the Brigadier does. She has a number of skills that go through. And yes, let me put it in these terms, she is more vulnerable than Liz Shaw, and she does need the plot explained to her more than Liz Shaw. But I get that in a TV show, you do have to have someone for the Doctor to explain the plot to, and you do need someone who can get into danger. But Jo Grant does get to rescue the Doctor probably at least as often as he gets to rescue her.
I still can't get around, though, that Jo does come across as ditzy. And it's kind of a new sort of, as I say, you think back to other companions. Zoe wasn't a ditz. Polly, even though she was a 60s dolly bird, she wasn't a ditz. Barbara certainly wasn't. Susan wasn't.
I don't think that Jo is either.
Really?
I think that she is, as I said, I think she is more green, and I think that she's perhaps more in touch with cultural sort of norms. And maybe it's that soap opera thing you're talking about earlier, Rob, where because we're seeing her on a regular basis in contemporary London, she gets to go out on dates more, and she gets to go and see concerts more and make all those sort of pop culture references. but I think she's extremely well qualified, and she going right through to something like Frontier in Space. She gets to outwit the Master. She gets to prove herself immune to his hypnotism and has grown as a character because she was vulnerable to it in Terror of the Autons. I think that you're underselling Jo quite a bit there.
Okay, well, we've mentioned Liz briefly. We've talked a lot about Jo. Compare and contrast her, though, to Sarah Jane. And I guess it's a bit unfair because Sarah Jane does kick on into the Tom Baker era, and against a different Doctor, I think she grows and progresses a lot more than she would have perhaps with Pertwee. But I see Jo as being incredibly different to Sarah Jane, for example.
There is certainly an extra level of independence around Sarah Jane. And I think part of that comes by the fact that Jo is a unit employee and is therefore formally the Doctor's assistant. Sarah Jane is actually an independent journalist. She writes for serious magazines. She just happens to bump into the Doctor in the course of one of those stories and then goes on an adventure with him, and then he's just kind of hanging out with him. And even in Invasion of the Dinosaurs, there's almost this thing of like, well, hang on, you're just a civilian. You shouldn't be here. And that does give her a level of independence that I think Jo is lacking. It is a step forward. But yeah, look, it's interesting you raise that. I mean, part of it also as well comes from the fact that although there's obviously a very, very great fondness between the Third Doctor and Jo, and you only need to see the way that he reacts to her departure in The Green Death, just to see how good that is. Not just the leaving scene at the end, which is one of the best leaving scenes of any companion, but the moment in part 1 where he says, "Come and travel with me in the TARDIS," and she says, "No, I'm going to go off and do what I think's important." At that point, he knows she's leaving.
Yeah.
And you really feel that. But beyond that, though, yes, there is a certain arrogance to the Pertwee Doctor, which I think I love, and I get why other people sometimes find it annoying. But the way he treats Jo sometimes does, I guess, give some credence to what you're saying, Rob. I think of that wonderful example in about part 4 of The Demons, where the Doctor's talking to the Brigadier about how to get through the heat barrier, and the Brigadier makes a comment, and the Doctor sort of says to everyone, "What a stupid decision. The Brigadier doing that. Oh, what an idiot." Then about 2 minutes later, something else happens, and Jo says, "Gee, the Brigadier doing that. What an idiot." And the Doctor turned around, "Jo, don't you talk about the Brigadier that way. How dare you?" And it's so hypocritical and it's so arrogant. And I love it. But yes, I can see where that dynamic does feed into what you're saying, Rob.
And just to go back to that Green Death scene, it's almost like the Doctor is leaving Jo rather than Jo leaving the Doctor. The Doctor's been replaced by, as I said earlier, the younger version of himself, and he's the one who drives off into the sunset, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But all of them do get on with Pertwee in a different way. I just need to reinforce, though, I love the dynamic between Liz Shaw and the Doctor. I love the way that with Pertwee at his hardest and most arrogant, he's got a companion who is so willing to go toe-to-toe with him. And she does go toe-to-toe with him. And Liz Shaw is certainly not a peril monkey. I mean, yeah, okay, she screams when she's attacked by Silurian and Claude. I give her that one. When she's kidnapped by the baddies in Ambassadors of Death, she gives them a pretty good chase before she's captured. She throws one off the edge of a weir and then successfully escapes once only to be recaptured, and that's not her fault. She's a very capable companion. Does that help the drama sometimes? Maybe not.
Yeah. Of the three, Dave, I'm going to ask you which is your favourite, if you can even determine that. For me, it's... Growing up, I was very much in the Jo camp, probably because she is in the majority of these stories and seemed to be the most, I don't know, personable out of all of them, and probably the one, as you know, as a 10-year-old, I thought, I could be friends with that lady. She's quite nice, to look at it in those sort of terms.
Yeah.
Sarah Jane, I equate so much with the Tom Baker Doctor. I almost forget she's a Pertwee companion first. And Liz is hardly in any stories, obviously only 4 stories in that first season. And as a kid, she just didn't resonate with me as much as Jo because she was maybe a bit more clinical, a bit colder perhaps. But as an adult, I've come to really, really like Liz. On balance, I find it very hard to say. I'd probably still actually go with Jo simply because I've seen her in so many stories. But my regard for Liz is quite high, and I think what Sarah Jane does with Tom is amazing. They're 3 pretty good companions, but all quite different in themselves and with the way they interact with the Pertwee Doctor, as you said.
If you asked me this question when I was 13, I would have said, without hesitation, Liz Shaw. Clearly head and shoulders above the others. Absolutely.
As a youngster?
As a youngster, absolutely. Now I will still answer Liz Shaw, but it's a much tougher split to make because Sarah, you're right, you bring in all the stuff that you see with her in the Tom Baker era, but she's so strong in season 11, so strong. Jo Grant is the one that I've actually come to regard more as I've grown up, and I've started to see just what her abilities were and how good a performance she gives. And also, and this is the final point I want to make, how much Jo Grant really does set the template for the companion that frankly is still the template used today. It is the Pertwee era, but I think particularly Jo Grant, that does set up this idea that you have the Doctor and a companion and the way they work together. And that goes right through the rest of the 70s. It comes back at the end of the 80s, and where it's not done in the 80s, I think most people kind of say that it doesn't work as well. Maybe Tegan and Turlough, or maybe the Doctor and Adric briefly kind of work, but that idea of the Doctor and a female companion isn't a thing until the Pertwee era, but it's another thing that Letts brings in that does last until today.
I agree 100% with that. I find, though, that most people attribute it to the Doctor and Sarah, which is, a bit rude because the Doctor and Jo did it first. Yeah,
3 full seasons Jo Grant was there. That is right. Really formative, yeah.
Shall we move on to season 11?
Take us through it, Rob.
Well, season 11, Dave, spanned 73 and 74, and it contains some wonderful stories, also some stories I've never quite gotten into. It kicks off with the Time Warrior, which some people really love, but I never had a lot of regard for. And maybe we can touch on that a bit later. Invasion of the Dinosaurs, I think, is absolutely amazing. Even for a longer story, it always keeps my interest. It is fantastic. I know you're the president of the Invasion of the Dinosaurs Appreciation Society, Dave. I'm a card-carrying member myself. Death to the Daleks, a bit of fun. Daleks with machine guns, yeah, take it or leave it. Monster of Peladon, best not said too much about that. And Planet of Spiders, I think, has some really wonderful moments, but is perhaps a little overblown, a little self-indulgent, and could be a bit tighter. So, of all the Pertwee seasons, this could possibly be the weakest, even though it contains such a gem like Invasion of the Dinosaurs.
Yeah, I think that there is an argument that it is the weakest. I'm not convinced. I think that season 9 has its problems as well. And they both have their strengths. They're both very good seasons. There's a lot I like about season 11. I think that Sarah coming in does give it a new dynamic. I think that Pertwee is very confident in this one. I think the Brigadier gets back on form in this one after being a little off in season 10 particularly. I love the credits, the opening credits for this. They're my favourite opening credits, so that's a good thing. But yes, it isn't perfect. To go in reverse order, Planet of the Spiders, I've said before, is it the best story to contain a regeneration? Absolutely not. Is it the best regeneration story in terms of a thematic summing up of the era, bringing back cast and crew and celebrating that era? I think absolutely. And it does bring home the character of the Doctor. And the fact that his arrogance and his greed leads him down the path that causes his death, so to speak, is such an important aspect of the era. Monster of Peladon, I think, is unquestionably the low point of the era. It is terrible, it is boring, it is cheap, it is just awful. That's a shame. Death to the Daleks would have been one of my absolute most watched stories when I was a kid. I think as a young boy, that was so exciting. Nowadays, I can see its lack of depth, but I still enjoy it for what it is. Mm-hmm. Invasion of the Dinosaurs, you've summed up my views, and I think it's just a wonderful story. Time Warrior, though, yeah, I like it, but I'm not sure why, and I don't think it's quite the Stone Cold classic others do. I think Lynx is a great character. I think that Robert Holmes doing Iron Gron and Blood Axe is a really good example of the Holmes in double act. Sarah gets a good introduction. All the bits are good.
Yeah, it's not bad, but ...
It is, yeah, it's not bad at all. It's very enjoyable. It doesn't quite come together with the spark that I think the other best Pertwees do.
Agree.
So, look, that brings us to the end of the Pertwee era on screen, but we've got a few little dot points we have to talk about. Rob, I said earlier that The Three Doctors is my favourite multi-doctor story, and you came down the microphone and slapped me. So tell us about the Five Doctors and Pertwee in particular.
Oh, Dave, as I always say, the Five Doctors is a comfortable pair of slippers. It just feels like such fun. And to talk about the Third Doctor in particular, we mentioned earlier his era not having Cybermen. Five Doctors gave him Cybermen. At long last, the Pertwee Doctor shared the screen with them. He wasn't standing up to them, though. He was just watching them get massacred by another robot. But at least we saw him on screen with them. The Pertwee Doctor in the Five Doctors, I think, is just this beautiful amalgam of what the Pertwee Doctor had been during his era. Everything's there. The bouffant hair, which he, like Peter Capaldi, he started off with short hair, but finally had the bouffant. And in Five Doctors, he has the bouffant going on. He has the opera jacket going on. He's got Bessie, although they have to leave it behind at some stage. And he's teamed up with Sarah Jane Smith. It's just fantastic. He also gets to be, without Tom Baker there, I think Pertwee gets to sort of take command at times, because Davison does have that more meek persona. Even though he's the incumbent, he sort of takes a step back for Pertwee and Troughton in particular. Obviously Herndl is a bit of a ring-in. So yeah. I think Pertwee gets a bit of a star turn at times in the Five Doctors, frankly. Yeah, I think he's a standout in the Five Doctors. He's the one that best walks straight back into the role. You mentioned a lot of good interactions there. He gets that lovely interaction with the Master at the start, where he just doesn't trust him and gets to be arrogant to him. Pertwee also gets that lovely moment when he sees Lethbridge Stewart for the first time, and there's that such warm regard and respect. That's a lovely moment. As is that wonderful moment where it's the Brigadier who, on seeing the Master, does the whole line, "Nice to see you again, wallop." And that's clearly been many years in the making, and I love that Terrance Dicks gives the Brigadier that chance to actually finally smack the Master. Yeah, like I say, it's just all these wonderful little moments, and it just fits like comfy slippers. It's wonderful. I can see why, though, you say it's a different type of story to the Three Doctors. I mean, the Three Doctors, Hartnell's just popping up on a screen from time to time saying, how are you going, eh? And he's sort of sidelined. It's more like Two Doctors, really, having a pretty solid adventure, whereas Five Doctors is more like little set pieces put together. Yes, and the Third Doctor does get to reverse the polarity of the neutron flow, so that's important. Yes. Nowadays, Rob, we think of former Doctors turning up in audio adventures as being not just standard, but maybe excessive. Whereas back in the 90s, it wasn't a thing. And the first ones to happen were Jon Pertwee and Nick Courtney and Elizabeth Sladen coming back to do 2 audio adventures in the 30th anniversary for the BBC, The Paradise of Death and The Ghost of N-Space. Paradise of Death, to me, is probably my favourite audio adventure. And part of that is nostalgic, part of that is symbolic. But it is a very good adventure that I think kind of sums up the Pertwee era pretty well. It's a little bit odd in that, it can now be set in sort of the not-too-distant future from where we are now, and that doesn't all quite gel that well, but it's got alien races, it's got going off into space, it's got monsters, it's got an ecological message. I really like it. It was written by Barry Letts, of course, who does it, and those actors sort of slip into the roles very well. The Ghost of N-Space is absolutely terrible. I've listened to it once and not again. I probably should give it another go sometime, because it is, 20-something years since I last heard it? Yeah. So I should give it another go, but I'm very pleased that Pertwee got to do a couple of those audios before he did die in 1996. Yes, and of course the Third Doctor's legacy goes on in audio, although I'm not sure how keen you might be on this sort of thing, Dave. Big Finish has done a bunch of companion chronicles where past companions, so you got like Katie Manning and other people who acted alongside Pertwee, sort of narrate a story and will do impressions of him. And if you've never heard Katie Manning doing Pertwee before, it's kind of a treat. But perhaps more controversially, Big Finish also does the Third Doctor Adventures, where they have recast the Third Doctor with a fella called Tim Treloar. He does a passable Pertwee. He certainly does a better Pertwee than Big Finish's replacement for Capaldi does Capaldi, which I just find bizarre given Capaldi is still alive, and we have no option with Pertwee. I don't know how you feel, though, about someone doing essentially a Pertwee impersonation, even though he does appear alongside Katie Manning portraying Joe Grant, Dave.
It's not something that interests me.
Right.
I don't say that in an aggressive or negative way. If I had 50 hours in the day, it's the sort of thing I'll check out, but I don't, and it just if people enjoy them, then that's great. I have no problem with that. It's just not something that's ever really got high enough on my radar to listen to.
No, fair enough. And of course, there's also a bunch of short trip audios, and the BBC audio drama department have also put out a lot of Doctor Who stories featuring past Doctors, where someone narrates a story featuring a past Doctor, like the Third Doctor. So there is a lot of extra Third Doctor content out there on audio if you do seek it out.
We'll move then very quickly to the books, because the Pertwee era does continue in the books. I've got to say, as someone who is a fan of the Virgin Missing Adventures, I think that the Third Doctor's era is probably one of the, if not the weakest one that's covered in this era. There aren't a lot of really good books there. The standout for me out of the Virgin range is The Scales of Injustice by Gary Russell. I think that's a really good book. That's with Liz Shaw and Unit, and it's a sequel to the Silurians and a prequel to the Sea Devils and the Warriors of the Deep. And it does actually do a lot of stuff in there with the Unit characters. Dance in the Code isn't bad. Eye of the Giant isn't bad, but that's the standout for me. I should also mention in the New Adventures that the book Legacy, although it's a McCoy Doctor story, it is a sequel to the Peladon stories, again written by Gary Russell. And ironically, as we record this, I don't know what's going to happen in the next 10 days before this comes out with Brexit, but given that we are meant to have the UK leaving the EU in 11 days' time from time of recording, it's interesting that Legacy actually has Peladon leave the Galactic Federation after joining it in Curse of Peladon. So that's a nice little bit of a segment there. In terms of the BBC books, one of the ones they were launched with was The Devil Goblins from Neptune, which is a really good Pertwee book. And I've got to mention quickly one of my favourite Doctor Who books of all time, which is David Mcginty's Face of the Enemy, which is set in the Pertwee era without the Third Doctor. He goes off on an adventure. There is an invasion of a sort I won't give away, and the Brigadier needs help. He calls upon eminent scientists with some expertise in this area, Barbara and Ian Chesterton, to come and help him. But he also says to the Master, who's in jail at this time, look, if the Earth's destroyed and you're here, that's bad for you, so how about you come and help me beat this invasion? And it goes from there, and it's one of the best portrayals of the Master in any medium whatsoever. So that's a couple of books that I particularly liked from the Third Doctor's era. What about you, Rob?
Yeah, I jotted down Face of the Enemy too, Dave. We'll just leave it at being a sequel to a very popular Third Doctor story.
Yes.
If people want to seek that out, they can. I've read probably half of the PDAs that involve the Third Doctor, and I've got to say most of them were pretty traditional, classic type stories, and they resonated pretty well with me. He gets a lot of good BBC and Virgin writers writing for him. He gets David A. Mcginty, as you mentioned. He gets a Mark Gatiss story called Last of the Gadarene. He gets a Terrence Dicks story. Actually, he gets a Terrence Dicks and Barry Letts story called Deadly Reunion, and another one called Island of Death by Barry Letts. So there's a lot of really traditional type stuff going on in the PDA range. But I wanted to just briefly mention his role in the EDA range, or the Eighth Doctor range, where in a couple of books called Interference Book 1 and Interference Book 2, the Third Doctor plays a small but absolutely major and integral role to the storyline and the Eighth Doctor and so on. And the author of these books, Lawrence Miles, gets a lot of crap, but I'll say that I think Lawrence Miles' imagination leaves most Who writers in the dust. It makes them look like 8th graders. Interference, Book 1 and 2, is absolutely astonishing for Doctor Who fiction. And when people say that the BBC books range maybe wasn't as good as the Virgin books range, I'd broadly agree, but I'd also point to stuff like interference. I mean, I guess it's not everyone's cup of tea. Interference can be quite heavy and full on. I mean, when the Third Doctor's TARDIS console starts dripping blood, I guess some people might go, oh, that's really weird. That never happened on TV. That isn't my Third Doctor. Whereas to me, I'm intrigued. I'm like, wow, what an image. What is going on here? And as I say, he's not in the books a lot, but what he does in the books profoundly affects the Eighth Doctor. I just think interference is amazing. And also, I'll mention this one because I didn't know about this until I started researching for this episode. There was a new Third Doctor novel, sort of a standalone hardbacky type thing called Harvest of Time, which came out in June of 2013, so it might have been a 50th anniversary tie-in. I never saw any publicity about it though, Dave, and that's a Third Doctor, Joe and Master story, you know, the Brigadiers in it, and so on. It's one I might go out and track down. I think there's even an audio version read by Jeffrey Beavers, and I think it could be the most recent Third Doctor story in print, at least.
Okay, that's interesting. I didn't know some of that. So there's a couple there I might check out. Finally, I just wanted to mention, in terms of Jon Pertwee himself, the role he played as the senior figure in fandom in the 90s when I was most involved. Pertwee did go through a period where, like a lot of actors, he wanted to distance himself from the show. You notice that when he goes on chat shows like Parkinson in the late 70s, early 80s, he's not talking about Doctor Who. He's wearing Jon Pertwee clothes, not the Third Doctor clothes, and he's off doing Wurzel Gummidge, and he loved doing Wurzel Gummidge. But as he sort of moved further towards retirement, that's when he did start to do those appearances in the Third Doctor's costume and really did become this father figure for the series. I think people like Davison and McCoy and Colin did look up to Pertwee, and there was a respect for him. He did involve himself in some of the amateur productions, the Airzone Solution being the big one, where he does play the elder statesman figure in that story. And so, yeah, I think that's sort of a lovely final involvement for him. And he was a big raconteur at conventions throughout his life.
Do you think, Dave, he was a bit miffed by Tom Baker coming into the series, from the point of view that perhaps towards the end of his era he didn't want to leave, then he got replaced by a guy who just blitzed past his record? I mean, Pertwee puts in all these years into the role, probably thinks I am the Doctor, in fact makes a recording to that effect, but then Tom Baker comes in, blows him away in terms of popularity with the public, in terms of the years he puts into the show, and is regarded as the definitive Doctor. Do you think Pertwee might have been miffed by that and then saw an opportunity, as Baker really didn't give a hoot about fandom and such in the late 80s, 90s and such, for Pertwee to get into the costume and go out there, you know, saying, I am the Doctor, and really taking that role because, you know, Baker wasn't too interested in it?
It's speculative, but it does sound right, doesn't it?
It's how I read it from the outside, at least.
Very, very much.
Yeah, but look, Jon Pertwee is a man, wonderful. We were talking books, and I'll just go back briefly to mention there is a autobiography called Moon Boots and Dinner Suits, which is a great read. It's more about his early life and his Navy life and the war and such like that, than it is Doctor Who. And there is a later one which is more of a coffee table picture book, very light on words, called I Am the Doctor, done with David J. Howe, and that came out posthumously. But still worth a look if you can get your hands on it. Very expensive though. It's never been reprinted. I'm fortunate to have a copy here myself.
Great. No, Moon Boots and Dinner Suits I have read, and that is a very interesting book. Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Rob, we've summed up the Pertwee era, and there's a lot we still could have talked about. I mean, I could talk quite a bit about some of the directors of the era, people like Michael E. Bryant and Timothy Coombe, who do a really good job. We could talk, as we did a bit in our Terrence Dicks special, about the writers who get involved here. There's so much we haven't touched, but before we get into our emails, we are going to do our personal top 5 Pertwees.
Yes, and for me, Dave, it might be a bit cutesy, but I ended up picking one from each season.
I did the same thing.
No!
Because I sat there and I thought, well, look, I could do the easy thing, which is just to pick the 4 season 7 stories and Invasion of the Dinosaurs. I thought, no, that's cheating. I'll diversify this by doing one from each season. So there you go.
Okay, fantastic. Well, Who wants to kick off, Dave?
Look, my pick for season 7 is probably really obvious, so I'll let you kick off.
My pick from season 7, Dave, is Spearhead from Space. In a great season, I think Spearhead just pips it for me. A, because it's the shorter of all the stories, and it's just more watchable for that. And B, all shot on film, looks amazing, looks like a TV movie. It's just fantastic.
It is gorgeous, it is wonderful. My pick is obviously Doctor Who and the Silurians, my favourite Doctor Who story. I love the Silurians as a concept, I love them as an execution, I love the actors and the cast that are brought into this, I love the twists that go through the plot, I love the drama and the big scale of it, I like the writing. This to me is everything Doctor Who should be. I absolutely adore it. And look, the fact that Pertwee's first 2 stories in the role, really his first 4, are so good, sets him up really, really well.
It really does. Now, I went first last time, so season 8 is yours.
I suspect we may get a snap here because I've gone with the Demons.
Snap!
I thought we might. The Demons copped a lot of criticism in the 90s, and I think that's because it was held up as being the classic Pertwee, more because of the reputation it had amongst the cast than anything. The cast clearly loved making this story. They clearly loved this story, and it was sort of built up as being the best Pertwee. Is it the best Pertwee? No, it's not. But in the way that fandom does, they take it, well, if it's not the best, it must be terrible. No, it's not the best. It's just really, really, really good. I've been to Devil's End. I've been to the village, and I've scouted out. And for a lot of fans, that is a pilgrimage they do. It is a story that really is quite deep in the marrow of a lot of fans. But yeah, I enjoy it so much.
The Demons, to me, is more comfortable pair of slippers type viewing like The Five Doctors. It's not a story like The Five Doctors, I hasten to add, but I get the same comfortable feeling whenever I watch it. The unit family's doing its thing, the Master's doing his thing, Doctor Who is in a small English village, which just feels so right, and you think, oh, Doctor Who does this all the time. Then you stop and think, no, actually, Doctor Who hardly ever does this, but it feels so right in a small English village. It's just spooky and fun and wonderful.
I agree. Your pick for season 9, Rob?
Season 9, Dave, I'm going to go with Day of the Daleks.
That's a very good choice, but I've gone with The Curse of Peladon.
Okay, and I can see why you've done that, but for me, Day of the Daleks just brings back happy memories of watching it on BBC Video back in the day. I think the time travel aspect to it is great. I think the Doctor's really on form. There's some great location filming, some exciting stuff happening. And I think the revamped version they did for DVD with some new effects and such really helped the story. They even filmed some actual new footage of Daleks getting about on the lawns of that country house.
Yes.
I just think it's wonderful. It's one of the best redos they've ever made. It's not the reason I'm picking it, though. I just think it's a good, fun story.
Look, I agree. I could very easily have gone the Day of the Daleks. I could probably have gone the Sea Devils. But I picked Curse of Peladon because of the excitement that I have from it. I love the world that they build on Peladon. I love all the different aliens. It's just a really good sci-fi story.
Okie dokie. Your turn for Season 10.
Season 10 is the season I found hardest to pick a story. I went for The Green Death.
Snap!
Yeah, thought that would be the case. Again, I could make an argument for Frontier in Space. I could make an argument for The Three Doctors. Carnival of Monsters, I really love. It's probably not my favourite there, and Planet of the Daleks I enjoy, but it's clearly not the best of the season. The Green Death, what can we say? It's the best of unit. It's scary. It's got Boss. It's got Joe's departure, Cliff Jones.
It's got a cross-dressing Jon Pertwee.
It's got Jon Pertwee doing the milkman and the cleaning lady, plus his whole little surgeon off to Metebelis 3. It's so good. It is so good. We haven't really gone into depth about the writers from the Pertwee era, but Robert Sloman is one who comes back regularly, works with Barry Letts, and they really knock it out of the park with The Green Death.
Yeah, look, The Green Death, there's so much we can say about it. We touched on a few things briefly there. For me, it's one of those longer stories that doesn't feel like a longer story, and it's one of those longer stories when I'm looking at the shelf and I'm thinking, what will I watch today? And I'll often go just back to the 4-part stories because they're easier to watch. Green Death isn't one of those. I'm like, Green Death? Yeah, I'll watch Green Death. I don't care how long it is. It's just that good.
Yep, I agree.
Which brings us to season 11, Dave, and I feel we're going to get another snap here because I've gone with Invasion of the Dinosaurs.
Yep, snap.
There we go.
You knew that was going to happen.
Oh, I did. That was no surprise. Just a wonderful story, and again, like I just said about the Green Death, a longer story, but one that I'm still always happy to put on, and I don't care that it's a longer story, and that's actually rare for me in Doctor Who. Longer stories do put me off, as I just said. Wonderful story. Effects, okay, people talk about them. Let's move beyond that. The story itself is just really good. Spooky, deserted London scenes at the start. Just great. The Doctor and Sarah just firing off each other in what was... that was only their second story together, wasn't it?
It was, yes.
Yeah, just great. A wonderful story.
This was the season where I found it easiest to pick my favourite. Death to the Daleks would be the runner-up because that is an immensely fun and enjoyable story, but the message of Invasion of the Dinosaurs is wonderful. The characters, three-dimensional characters with motivations, what they do with Mike Yates in it, the way that deserted London is used so effectively, and yet, look, some of the dinosaurs don't look that great. I still say some of the ones like the Triceratops and the Stegosaurus actually look pretty good. It's the T-Rex that doesn't quite work, but we've used this phrase a lot this episode when I say as a boy, but the Pertwee era for me was about being a boy, being a young kid. And sorry, when I was 5, the Tyrannosaurus turning up to scare you at the cliffhanger or bursting through the wall of the aircraft hangar, that scared me. That was a dinosaur. And maybe I was a naive 5-year-old, but God, it was wonderful. And it stands up now as a story.
Yeah, absolutely does. And I know out there amongst our listeners, because we talk to them about it sometimes, there's a lot of love for this story.
It surprises me just how much, as people come to watch this story again on DVD, they are learning to appreciate it, and I'm really, really happy about that.
Agree.
So I think I've said everything I want to say about the Pertwee era. Pertwee's a great Doctor, 3 great companions, lots of really good stories, but an era that just hangs together really, really well, and above all was just a big part of my childhood.
Yeah, and look, an era which it seems we can talk to each other and say, you know, has it been forgotten about a bit? We're not sure. And then we put out a poll, and it seems that maybe it has been forgotten, and people did want us to talk about it because this era does get lost. It's not the black and white era. It's not the Tom Baker era. It's not the 80s under John Nathan Turner. It's something else, and maybe it does get forgotten at times, and that's a damn shame because there is such quality in the Pertwee era. It's unbelievable.
I am looking forward to more of his era coming out on Blu-ray, and I think we're going to see a real boost for Pertwee's regard by a fandom generally when that happens.
Oh, yeah, and how can that not happen? I mean, he's cool looking, he's got the gadgets, he's got the cars, it's just such a fun era in general.